you don't have to suffer if you've got a child with ADHD. There is hope that ADHD can be managed naturally by addressing what's going on in that body. There are so many parents out there that feel hopeless, but I want them to know there is another way and your child can thrive.
Our next guest, Donna Kay, after struggling to find effective solutions for her own child's ADHD and growing frustrated with traditional treatments, she rolled up her sleeves and dug into the research and created a science-based strategies to improve focus, behavior, and emotional regularities, which she now shares worldwide through her ADHD Thrive Institute.
It is not normal for a child to have meltdown every day. It's not normal for a child to have meltdowns multiple times a day. Yes, a child can have a little meltdown and get over it, but it shouldn't last for an hour. It shouldn't be every single day. That is a sign from their body to you saying,
Hi, my name is Chris Burris. I'm a longevity expert and the chief scientist at a lab focused on a longevity molecule. My primary focus is to help people live longer and better lives with science. Make sure to subscribe and share so you and your friends can live longer and better. Well, actually, so you and your friends can live beyond the norms.
Hi, and welcome to the next episode of the Live Beyond the Norms Health and Longevity Podcast. Maybe you struggle with ADHD. Maybe someone in your family struggles with ADHD. Maybe you just want to understand the rise, cause, and prevalence of ADHD in our modern society. If so, you want to stick around for this next interview. Our next guest, Donna Kay, got it right, is an author, a podcast host, and founder of the ADHD Thrive Institute. She is also a board-certified health and nutrition practitioner. After struggling to find effective solutions for her own child's ADHD and growing frustrated with traditional treatments, she rolled up her sleeves and dug into the research and created a science-based strategies to improve focus, behavior, and emotional regularities, which she now shares worldwide through her ADHD Thrive Institute. Donna has a mission to provide hope, practical strategies, and a path to thriving without medication. Donna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Chris, thank you so much for having me here today.
All right. So before we jump into your area of expertise, I always like to go back. I like to go much farther back. What was it like growing up, little Donna? Where did you grow up? What were your parents like? And if there was some event or someone you could pinpoint as the reason you would ultimately become a health and nutrition practitioner as well as an ADHD expert, what or who would that be?
Oh, that's a really great question. Little Donna was born in Australia, as you can tell by the accent. And I was there for most of my life. I married my high school sweetheart there, who I am still married to today. I had my first child there, and grew up in a pretty normal household back in Australia. Me and my husband left Australia, I think back in 2011, where we lived in Singapore for 5 years and then finally ended up here in Seattle, Washington. We've been here for 10 years now, and we are not going anywhere. But if I had to credit my journey to anyone, it would be my son. My oldest son. Believe it or not, I actually never imagined I'd end up in health and wellness. I actually started in accounting. Don't tell anyone. And, I was...
No one ever really does tell anyone about their exciting accounting career.
Totally. I was working long hours. I was climbing the corporate ladder. That's what I wanted to be when I grew up. I was living my dream. I was focused on building that career in this field, and I probably would have stayed on that path if it wasn't for my son's severe ADHD symptoms. And when he was diagnosed with ADHD, we were immediately given medication as the only option. And at first, I just felt this sense of relief. It wasn't that I was a bad mum. Finally, we had an explanation, and I had that pill that was going to fix my family. But as the dosages increased, so did the side effects, and soon he was on 3 powerful medications. And when the doctor recommended a 4th to counteract the side effects of the others, I knew I had to had to find a different path, and that moment sort of changed everything for me. And I started researching alternative approaches, diving deep into functional medicine, nutrition.
Let's pause there for just a
Yeah.
little bit, right? So what are some of the behaviors that kind of, and how did you end up? Because I actually have twins. They're 14-year-old twins now. They're
Yes.
both ADHD. And so I have my kind of particular journey where like, oh, apparently they're ADHD. Like what was that like for you?
Yeah, look, I mean, we used to walk around on eggshells. I wouldn't know what would set off the next tantrum, and I was on this just constant emotional roller coaster. He would have so much energy, way beyond any other child his age, and I just when I thought about what I had pictured my life to look like, that photo that you picture in your mind of what that happy family is, it was nothing like that. And I used to say to my husband, I don't like my son. And as a mum, that is like, I think as a dad as well, that's extremely difficult to be able to say that out loud. Look, I loved him, but I just didn't like him. And when his symptoms were at his worst, there was so much emotional dysregulation. And, I think that was when I sort of said to myself, something's just not right. I knew deep down in my gut that something was a little bit different about him.
Yeah, and so then was it school that kind of sent you, hey, you need to have somebody look at him? Because that was kind of the case with us, and we did resist medications for some period of time. What did that look like for you?
Yeah, look, I just knew that there was something going on, and I'd always ask preschool, is there something different about him? And they would say, oh, look, don't worry, he's just a boy. And I got that a lot. I got that from the doctors when he was younger, and eventually it started to catch up. When he was just about to head into school, the preschool that he was at was like, look, maybe he's a little bit more hyperactive than other kids. He doesn't sort of sit down and focus. Not that a 4-year-old can sit down and focus. I mean,
Yep.
what do you expect of a boy? And so that's when we went and got him tested, and he was diagnosed with ADHD. And that was that moment where I was like, oh, yes, I'm not going crazy. This is not my fault. There is something that is driving this.
Yeah, and was that in Australia or were you here?
No, this was in America. Yeah. So it was when we
already
first
here.
arrived in America. When we were originally in Singapore, that was when I was sort of asking the preschool and the school, and I was getting, no, he's just a boy, don't worry about it. But then when we arrived in the US, we went and had proper eval psych testing, where he went to multiple visits, the full battery of testing. And even after the first visit with the doctor, I remember him saying, look, we haven't finished our testing yet, but I can tell you, in my mind, he will definitely be diagnosed with ADHD. He was on the floor, wrapped around the leg of the desk, while I was talking to him.
So my first kind of experience with somebody in authority was the principal of his elementary school. They called me in. I go and sit in the principal's office, and he goes, your son was standing on this table, like the table we were sitting at. And, part of you wants to laugh because that's really hilarious. And then the other part is like, this is not a situation where you can laugh. And so that kind of sent us down the path. And it sounds like you did a lot more intense investigation, which I'm very happy about, because ours was kind of like, you should send him to your pediatrician who we had a relationship with. She's like, oh, from the description of your teachers, he has ADHD. That was it. Like there was there's no evaluation in my mind.
And can
Okay,
I
so
say to that, can I talk to that quickly?
please.
And I think that's where the US go wrong. And I think that there is actually an overdiagnosis of ADHD because children are not getting the proper evaluation. ADHD is actually a diagnosis of, you have to disqualify all the other things it could be before you actually diagnose ADHD. And if, just as you said, you went to your pediatrician, They said, yep, he's got ADHD. Fill out a couple of forms. Here's some medication if you want it. But we need to actually, I think it needs to change, because anyone can watch TikTok these days and go, oh, look, I've got ADHD. Doctor, I've got ADHD. And so we need to dive deeper. And I think that that's something in the US that needs to change. It's very different in Australia, and it's very different in the UK, where they actually, you have to go through these battery of testings. There is a specialist that can diagnose ADHD. It can't be done at a general doctor's office.
So what are the things that you're ruling out, just to kind of have some perspective? You're like, hey, it's not this, it's not that.
Yeah, look, I mean, you rule out all health concerns because, there's so many things that can actually stop your ability to focus. And we'll go deeper into the things that I actually talk about. But you also have to rule out comorbidities. You have to rule out depression. You have to rule out anxiety. You have to rule out sensory processing. But none of that is actually done. And so that's why it's really important to get a full evaluation by a specialist doctor that specializes in diagnosing these disorders.
So you have this sense of relief, right? By the way, anyone out there who just their child is golden. By the way, one of our business partners here, I was kind of around when he was raising his daughter. She was just an absolute angel, still today is. And we're like, you got that. Now I know you got lucky. Like I thought they were just doing great jobs as parents. I'm doing the same kind of job, and it's a lot rougher, right? So there are these challenges. Don't beat yourself up, I think. And it sounded like maybe you were doing a little bit of that. You get this diagnosis, you get this medication. Did you have any apprehensions about even starting a medication? Did you and your husband have any debates, or you're just like, oh, this is clear, we need this?
I bounced on into that drugstore so fast to get that prescription without a second thought, because that is what the doctor told me to do, and I trusted the experts.
And I had a little bit of debate, but I didn't know. Honestly, I felt like I would have to roll up my sleeves so high, like, I don't know, way up here, in order to get in there and try and figure out some solution other than medication. So goes on medication, and then what you start needing a second and third and then ultimately a fourth. Like, what was going on that took you back? And they were like, oh, we can fix that with another By the way, I call these forever medications, which I think fundamentally are scary, whether it's statins or insulin or whatever. These forever medications, I think you need to work really hard and make better decisions to try and get around them. Like in some cases, they're absolutely necessary. But what were you experiencing that took you back, and then they said, hey, let's try this other drug?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, at first, it seemed to help, and he was playing nicely with his brother. We sort of just had this little bit a piece, for a couple of weeks, but it didn't take long for side effects to appear, and the dosage increased. And so what we were experiencing were things like insomnia. He wasn't able to fall asleep. He lost his appetite. He actually started to lose weight. But at first it was really these emotional outbursts. It was like, the medication would stunt everything inside him and push it all deep down inside. And then all of a sudden, as it would wear off, it would be like a volcano coming out. And so that was the first thing that took us back to the doctor. And so he increased the dose. And we went off on our merry way again.
Do you remember, and are you comfortable sharing which particular ADHD medication that was?
Yeah. So he was on dexmethylphenidate, extended release, and that was what he started out on. I can't remember. I think it started out at 5 milligrams, then it went up to 10 milligrams, then it went up to 15 milligrams, then it went up to 20 milligrams. And then that's when he started to not be able to sleep. And so then they added another medication in the evening, clonidine, to help with that. Then he started to lose weight and started to become really impulsive. So they added in a non-stimulant called guanfacine or Intuniv. And then he started to experience terrible anxiety. He became a shell of himself. He just has so much character. He's so outgoing, such a beautiful boy. But all of a sudden, it was like he was just there was no one in there anymore. And he didn't want to socialize. He didn't want to go to school. And so the doctor was about to give me an SSRI to treat the anxiety that was basically coming from all the other medications.
Right.
Every medication that was layered on was to treat the symptoms of the first medication. And that was the point where I was like, hold on.
Were you have any doubts in that buildup, right? Like second one, maybe the third one, you're like, okay, this like we're just putting it feels like we're putting Band-Aids, and then the fourth one was like, all right, now we got to do something different.
Look, it started straight away, that sort of little doubt, but you're like, no, Dana, trust the experts. Don't be ridiculous. They know what's best. And so that doubt started to grow and grow and grow. When that fourth prescription, was handed over to me, that was when I was like, this is not okay. He was then 5, and the doctor wanted him on 4 strong medication.
Wow. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. In kind of our journey, I was apprehensive at first, right? I don't know. I had enough exposure, like, hey, you should try not to. You should, these are forever medications. But then the sense of relief that comes from having them, right, and having a more normal child, or a child in our case, like with both of them, who could actually focus and get grades, which are really, obviously really important.
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we work to wean them off? So like, I can imagine that fourth would have broken the camel's back for sure. And then what'd you do, right? Like, my understanding, you rolled up your sleeves. Like, was there a period of weeks where like, what am I going to do? I've got to like scour the internet. Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, that's a good question. There was a pivotal moment in my journey with him. I remember I was at Costco, and I had taken him to Costco on a Sunday. It was a rainy, cloudy day in Seattle, and I just, like, everyone was climbing the walls, and I'm like, we've got to get out of here. And so I took him to Costco, and we're going through the aisles, and he wanted a snack, and I said, put in the trolley. We will, but we can't have it right now. We've got to pay for it. Anyway, this resulted in the most mammoth tantrum I have ever experienced, right with everybody watching on. If you just picture 2 glass pasta sauce jars smashed all over the floor, him lying in it, kicking and screaming. And I was absolutely mortified, and I felt this overwhelming emotion come over me. And I was looking around, and all I could see was people sort of diverting their gaze, looking away from me. And, I even overheard another, a pregnant lady say, "Oh, I'm never going to let my kid do that." And I was like, little do you know, lady. But anyway,
I didn't
exactly.
let this happen, right?
Yeah, exactly. But all of a sudden, I felt this overwhelming emotion come over me, and I lost it, and I burst out crying. And I was thinking to myself, like, why me? Why does my life have to be like this? And that was the exact moment where I was like, I've got to do something differently. And so I dived into all of the research. I stayed up so late every night reading studies, scouring the internet, scouring Facebook groups, just trying to find something that was a different approach for kids with ADHD. And that's when I really sort of stumbled on the research around nutrition, around gut-brain connection, and around inflammation in the body. And that's when I was like, hold on, there could be something here. And that really was that tipping point where I was like, I've got to do something about this. And I started educating myself. I went back to school. I did my, science degree. I went and did multiple specific certifications in this area, and nutrition for kids with ADHD, autism, all of that sort of stuff. And I really learned that ADHD symptoms can be reduced naturally. I learned so much about the gut-brain connection, and I started to make these changes with my son. It was not easy, let me tell you about that. But, once I started to make these changes, the changes in him were phenomenal. Like, literally, when we took out gluten, within 2 weeks, he was like a different child. You know, the first thing that changed was the reductions in meltdowns and tantrums. And for a parent with a child with ADHD, for those listening that are probably going through that right now, that's the hardest thing to deal with. And to know that that's actually, to have that comfort that that's actually one of the first things that, you know, you see a change, is actually reassuring.
So in this time, just some perspective for you on you. You have your accounting career, or did you kind of stop that so you could start taking care of you know, your son who's having these challenges? And
Yeah, I straddled both worlds for a very
yeah,
long time.
yeah,
You know, I obviously needed to fund my journey. So,
yep, yep,
you know,
absolutely.
I had to, I did it over, you know, a couple of years. You know, then one day, once he was thriving, I was like, I can't keep this to myself. You know, I
Mm,
can't let other families out there go through what I went through. It's not okay.
yeah.
And that's when I threw it all in.
And the other thing that pops to mind is you've got this pasta sauce disaster in Costco over a snack that will be had later, right? Like, so we're not, you know, from a practical, whatever adult perspective, there's no reason for even really to be upset, but it turns into a meltdown, and we understand why. But then you're going, and we got to remove gluten. I have to assume that there's, you know, bread is amazing, and there's, you know, sandwiches are easy, and so you're changing this dynamic. I know with my own son and my daughter, like sometimes changing that dynamic is extremely challenging. What did that look like for you?
What I did was not what I teach. And
Mm.
I actually,
There's another way.
yeah, there is a better, easier way, and it's not what I did. I mean, I don't want to scare families, but on day one, I actually removed out gluten, dairy, and soy, and over 40 food sensitivities that my son had. And let's just say there were multiple panic attacks with me lying on the bedroom floor, just overwhelmed in knowing what to do. But I definitely tell families that Rome was not built in a day. You do not need to make all of these changes in a day either. And so, you know, changing a child's diet, you know, especially when they're used to eating certain foods, can feel really overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. And so I really teach families to just start with small, gradual changes instead of overhauling everything overnight. You know, make it slow and manageable. You could, you know, start with breakfast. Maybe replace sugary cereal with a healthier option like oatmeal or grain-free granola, or, you know, bacon and eggs, whatever it may be. And once you're comfortable with that, let's move to lunch. Or you could swap out artificial snacks for whole food versions. You know, instead of cutting out gluten and dairy altogether, just cut out one meal at a time. You know, if you're used to having Taco Tuesdays every single Tuesday, or on a Thursday, doesn't really matter. Whatever floats your boat. Start by making that a better version, and when you're comfortable with that, move on to Monday night.
One at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine part of you, in your case, it's not just that Rome wasn't built in a day. You had to kind of destroy Rome and then rebuild it, and you kind of tried to do that in one day.
Yes, I
And,
did.
and part of you is like, well, I just read these articles. I'm not even sure if this is actually going to work, right? Like, and so you're
Yeah.
having, I'm assuming meltdown, not just your own, but
Yeah.
meltdowns, you know, going around you. Um,
Yes. Mummy
that's great.
meltdown,
So,
daddy meltdowns, children meltdowns. It was all happening, but I knew I had to do something differently because we were at rock bottom, and I just had to change. And I can say, like, looking back now, like, if you do it slowly, all of a sudden it becomes your new normal, and it's not hard
yeah,
anymore. And
yeah.
we've been eating this way for years, and it's just part of our normal.
And how old was your son when you started this kind of focus on
He
dietary change?
he was 5.
5. Okay.
Yeah.
So right in that same time frame.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that was really tough. So what was there anything maybe maybe a forum or, you know, a study that you read that was like, oh, this is probably what the problem is, right?
Look at
That you could lean on.
Yeah, look, I don't think it was one study. As I said, I dove into all of the science, and all of the research. I've run into so many non-believers, in my time. I'll tell you that my husband was definitely one of those, and I always throw him under the bus. Sorry, wherever you are. But he's at the office today, but it was the science that first made me rethink this direction with him. There's a lot of studies out there. I mean, I can rattle some off if you want me to, but I don't know if you want me to go down into that deep or not.
If anyone was trying to address their husband or their spouse, right, and there was one paper, does anything pop to mind like, hey, this is the paper that I would show them?
Yeah, look, there's a couple. There was a study done in 2015. It concluded that 64% of children diagnosed with ADHD were actually experiencing a hypersensitivity to food. I mean, 64%. Wow. I wonder what would happen if these children just changed their diet and removed the foods that they were sensitive to. Is it possible that these ADHD symptoms would disappear or even become more manageable?
Yeah.
I think the biggest study that I found that it was more of a family study. The Autism Research Institute studied or did this survey with 20,000 parents. And it actually compared different interventions that helped children with these neurodevelopmental issues, so ADHD, autism, and things like that. And it surveyed and it looked at the intervention. It looked at how many kids got better on that intervention, how many kids got worse using that intervention, and the better to worse ratio. So it was the better to worse ratio that I was mainly focused on. So if we just look at some of the ADHD medications and SSRIs, so the things that help depression and anxiety, it was around 1-to-1. So what that means is for every one kid that got better using that medication, one kid got worse. Okay. So I mean, I don't personally see how that could be a really good solution given one kid gets worse and one kid gets better. But it was the special diet section that really stood out for me. And they looked at the better to worse ratio for families that implemented a gluten-free and dairy-free diet. Mm-hmm. And it had I think it was a 24-to-1 ratio. Wow. 24 kids got better to one kid that got worse. But then you look at the reduced sugars and it was 27-to-1. 27 kids got better when they took out refined sugars out of their diet to one kid that got worse. And I can tell you most likely the kid that got worse was probably suffering from sugar withdrawal and the parents just didn't know about it. So I think for me, that was one of the game changers, especially around diet, because I know that there's a lot of, people out there going, oh, well, it's just diet. How can that make such a massive difference? But for me, that was one of those game changing studies that really was like, there's something here.
Yeah. You mentioned that you removed like gluten, dairy, something else, and then a lot of other food sensitivities.
Yeah.
Sugar? Yeah. Had you done a food sensitivity test? Like, is that something that was like your research probably bore it out? It was like, well, we can test this, and then you test and you talk about that.
Yeah, look, we did go down the testing path, and I think that is a really critical component to it. I will say functional lab testing is expensive. It's not covered by insurance, which just eats me up inside because so many more families could be helped. And, so many families could avoid medication. And so, instead of actually guessing what might be contributing to ADHD symptoms, these functional lab testing can actually uncover imbalances, sensitivity to things that really impact the gut and the brain and the behavior, and really helps sort of target what are those driving factors that are exacerbating those ADHD symptoms, rather than just sort of putting on a Band-Aid with a medication and just managing those symptoms. So one of those is a food sensitivity test, but I really tell families you don't want to just look at food sensitivities, because food sensitivities are there for a reason. There's an underlying reason why you're sensitive to that food, and it's usually something that's going on in the gut. The gut is broken down. The lining of the gut is, has formed these holes in it, and the food that you eat goes through those holes into the bloodstream. And, foreign objects are not designed to be in the bloodstream. And so the body actually sees them as invaders, and it turns on this inflammatory response. And so when you do a finger prick test to look for those food sensitivities, you are going to be sensitive to the foods that you eat the most often, because they're the ones that have got a chance to go through those holes. So we really need to look at why those food sensitivities are there in the first place. Back in the day when I did this with my son, I didn't know this, and I just, bought some food sensitivity panel off the web and took out all these foods. So don't do that.
So if I'm understanding what you're saying is that there may be one particular ingredient, food, whatever, that is actually causing leaky gut. And then now, because you eat these other things regularly, you might show up as sensitive to those things, even though like naturally you're not. If you were to just repair the leaky gut, then those things don't get into your bloodstream. And if they don't get into your bloodstream, you have your tolerance for them is perfect. Is that what?
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. When we're going through the process of, reducing inflammation in the body, we do want to take them out temporarily. I like to think of, I personally believe there's one major factor that is really driving ADHD symptoms or exacerbating ADHD symptoms, and that is inflammation. And the World Health Organization ranks chronic inflammation as the greatest threat to human health, which is like ridiculous. And so when I think of inflammation, I like to explain it, and I'm looking for something on my desk right now. So I've got this little trash can. So for those that are listening, I'm holding a little plastic trash can. For those that are watching, you can see me holding a trash can. And so
I appreciate
I think
you calling it a trash can instead of a bin. Like I know you've adopted.
Yes. I apologize in advance that if something comes out and you don't understand what I'm saying. I've been here for 10 years, but still it's just,
like you grow up, it's a bin. Like that's what it is. It's like,
well, thank you for acknowledging that. Most people don't even realize. But, we've got everyone's born with a metaphorical trash can in our body. And the goal through life is to keep the load on the trash can low. So if we think about the trash can that we've got in our house, we go and we load rubbish into it. And every Monday we take that trash can out to the sidewalk for the garbage truck to come and pick it up and empty it. And then we bring it back inside. But if you think about it, if you can't take that out to the garbage truck every Monday and it sits in your house and you continue to throw rubbish in it, what's going to happen? It's going to overflow. It's going to make your house absolutely disgusting. Okay. And so if you think about that, when we've got our trash can in our body, we're loading it with all this stuff, and which is a normal part of life. There's, for my son, there's medication, there's poor diet, there's substances like toxins, bacteria, pesticides. All of this contributes to what's inside the trash can. But some of us can't actually empty our trash can effectively. We can't take it to the side of the road on a Monday, meaning that our detoxification pathways are not working properly. This was what was happening with my son. So what happens is when that trash can gets so full of those inflammatory substances and we can't detox properly, the trash can overflows into our body. It allows inflammation to spread. And that's why symptoms begin to show and get worse and worse. This is what's happening with children with ADHD and most people that are suffering disease and disorder. This is not just ADHD. This is probably everything you talk about on the podcast.
Yep. Yes.
when it's overflowing, their body is filled with inflammation. We need to reduce it. And so, years of research have identified there are common signs and symptoms that develop as a result of this chronic inflammation. And, if you actually have a look at them, it's a lot of the symptoms that either we're suffering with as adults with disease and disorders, or our kids are suffering with these ADHD symptoms. It is not normal for a child to have meltdown every day. It's not normal for a child to have meltdowns multiple times a day. Yes, a child can have a little meltdown and get over it, but it shouldn't last for an hour. It shouldn't be every single day. That is a sign from their body to you saying, Mum, Dad, something is going on. I need to get checked out. So the real goal here is to reduce the load on the trash can and to allow the body to take it out to the side of the road when it needs to. And part of that is taking sort of this umbrella approach. I talk about gluten and dairy being highly inflammatory, but then we look at this food sensitivity panel that's creating inflammation currently in our body. So we take those foods out for a short period of time while we can reduce that inflammation and we can start to heal the lining of the gut so we don't have those food sensitivities anymore, and that inflammation is reduced and we are optimizing our detoxification pathways. Does that make sense?
I think it makes great sense.
Hey, super quick break from the podcast. Hopefully you're loving it. This is a way you can support the podcast and take advantage of a great offer. We're offering 50% off of one of our MCT bottles. MCT is an amazing oil. Add the ESS60 molecule to it. It's even more amazing. All you got to do is leave a review on iTunes, send us a notification that you've left that review. We'll get you a coupon code that'll get you 50% off of our MCT oil and free shipping. Back to the podcast.
Have you done another food sensitivity study or test with your son, and did it change dramatically like we're thinking it might have?
Yeah, really, really good question. I actually, I did multiple over the years, but I will tell you that you don't need to. And what I sort of say is that the approach that you want to start with is, let's just take this sort of umbrella approach. Let's just try to reduce inflammation. And we do that in a couple of different ways while we can work on healing. And when that inflammation is low, everyone's going to have food sensitivities. If I did a test now, I would have food sensitivities, but those food sensitivities are not creating so much inflammation in my body. My load on my trash can, it's down here. So having some inflammatory responses, inflammation in the body is normal, but it's when it's chronic inflammation and firing off in all these directions, that's when it becomes a problem. So having a few food sensitivities here and there are not going to create disease. But when your trash can's so full, it is.
Yeah. Do you do anything with wheat zoomers? Because I know wheat zoomers are a way to, that's a test, to really, Dr. Gundry tends to lean on that to identify leaky gut.
Yeah, it's my favorite test. My favorite test
It's funny.
of all time.
Just so the audience has good perspective, our professional accountant has a favorite test, and it's the wheat zoomer.
That is so funny. Our professional accountant. Well, I do consider myself a nutritionist now, not an accountant anymore. But let's leave that here. But yeah, that is actually funny. But no, the wheat zoomer. And sorry, I will spell it because I would say wheat zoomer as an Australian, but it's Z-O-O or Z-O-O. What do you say? Z or Z?
Z, yep.
Z-O-O-M-E-R. So Zoomer. It's from a lab called Vibrant Wellness, and it is my all-time favorite. If you could do one test, that would be it, because it's a crucial part of understanding what is going on in the body in terms of how you're reacting to gluten and wheat, but also what the level of leaky gut is. And so it's one of the most advanced gluten sensitivity tests on the market, but I love it because it tells you, are you sensitive to gluten? But it also tells you, do you have that leaky gut? Is gluten triggering an immune or inflammatory response? I can tell you that out of I've done probably about over 1,000 wheat zoomers in my business in working with families, and majority of kids that are suffering are highly sensitive to gluten and have leaky gut. I can think of, maybe a few handfuls of kids that are actually negative to gluten. One of those I did on my son probably a couple of years ago, but it was completely negative. But that was because he was doing gluten-free 100% and doing it well. It's actually a really good test to go, are you actually successful in your gluten-free lifestyle? Or is your child actually sneaking gluten when you think then they're gluten-free? But it was completely negative. So it's not impossible to get a negative test. But I will say that if your kid's suffering with ADHD symptoms, most likely you've got leaky gut and you've got gluten sensitivity.
Is the Zoomer, is that a blood draw? Is that a drop on a thing?
Yeah, finger prick test. If you don't want to do a finger prick test, you can go and get a full blood draw, but I know that most kids don't want to do that. And so it is a finger prick test that can be done at home.
Excellent. I want to ask one more question, get a little bit about your understanding your program, and then get into our wrap-up questions. Through Dr. Gundry, I became aware of A2 milk versus A1 milk. And, A1 milk is standard milk. Have you played around with that? And then maybe a short comment, because I want to have time for other stuff, just about glyphosate and its potential impact.
Yeah, look, really great question. I get asked it a lot because, people are like really trying to, where can I just keep dairy? Where can I keep gluten? I'm very familiar with A2 milk. And while it is a better option than conventional dairy, I still, when we're starting this process, for children with ADHD, in the initial stages of gut healing, I do say, let's take it out. A2 milk comes from cows that produce the A2 beta-casein protein instead of the A1, which is the one that's found in most conventional dairies, but it still does include casein, lactose. It also usually includes a peptide called casomorphin. And what I find, I actually do something called a dairy zoomer, which is a sister to the wheat zoomer or a brother. It actually looks at the different peptides inside dairy and sees if that child is reactive to any of the other peptides. So casomorphin, there are a couple of similar ones in gluten called glutamorphin and protonorphin. These actually bind to the opioid receptors in the brain. And when you think of opioid receptors, what do you think of? Morphine, don't you? Glutamorphin, protonorphin, casomorphin, and it creates neuropsychological issues in some children or in some adults. And so in order to stop that happening, we need to actually take it out of the diet, stop the body reacting. But then I find when we can actually reduce that inflammation, we can take that sort of, that global approach, start optimizing the body, and if your kids have been sort of symptom free for a long time and gut health is strong, some families do choose to trial something like A2 dairy or even raw goat's milk, goat's cheese. Goat's cheese and goat's milk is less inflammatory and less reactive. And so I actually like to start with those first, test it back in to see if their kids react. And if they don't, keep it in the diet on a rotational basis.
Excellent. Yeah. And I haven't, I literally, I was at a kid's birthday party on Saturday, and I apparently had recommended A2 milk. And so the couple was like, oh, this has been amazing. Not necessarily for the kid, but for themselves. Like they were having some digestive impact. Real quickly, glyphosate, obviously you get rid of it, but I think I saw one study that does correlate glyphosate and ADHD and maybe other kind of neurodivergence. Briefly talk about that, and then I want to understand what your program looks like.
Yeah, sure. Look, glyphosate, definitely a huge concern, especially with kids with ADHD. It leads to gut damage, it leads to inflammation, and, all of this leads to neurological issues, all of which are directly relevant to ADHD. Glyphosate, it's an antimicrobial, meaning it kills beneficial gut bacteria. And since the gut microbiome plays a key role in neurotransmitter production. So serotonin, 95% of it is made in the gut. 50% of dopamine is made in the gut. This can contribute to sort of mood swings, focus issues, hyperactivity. And that's why, it can be one of those really things that we actually want to reduce inside from our trash can. There's studies that show that glyphosate damage the intestinal lining. It leads to leaky gut. And so when the gut barrier is compromised, we get food sensitivities. Those food sensitivities trigger more inflammation. So, it is definitely one of those things that we do like to take out or reduce. I always say to families, everyone's budget is different. Yes, while it would be amazing to buy every single thing organic, it's not possible. And so, I actually follow, I'm sure you've talked about it before, but the EWG.org, and they actually put out every year something called a clean 15 and a dirty dozen. And the dirty dozen are the top fruits and vegetables that have the most amount of pesticides and herbicides on them. And it changes every year. Strawberries is always at the top of the list. Wow. It then puts out the clean 15 of the top 15 clean foods that have the least amount of pesticides on them. And so I say to families, look, well, 100% organic is best. Not everyone can afford it. You've got to do what's best for your budget. But if you are buying things on the dirty dozen, make sure they are organic. And if you want to buy things that aren't organic, then the clean 15 is a good area to focus. And then your budget really depends on everything in the middle, so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, well, and one last thing is you can, I believe, soak vegetables and fruits in baking soda and water for about 2 minutes. And I don't know the ratio. You can certainly Google it. And about 2 minutes will neutralize most of the pesticides that might be on any one of those. So talk a little bit about your book, right? Thriving with ADHD naturally reducing symptoms. I'm kind of abbreviating there. And then your program, the ADHD Thrive Institute.
Yeah, so look, my book is definitely a labor of love. Years ago when I was obviously going through this with my son, all I wanted was that book that was going to clearly spell out exactly what I needed to do to support my son with ADHD naturally, and I could never find it. And so, I had to go back to school. I was constantly Googling. I was doing everything, desperate, and when I was looking for that book, I just struck out over and over again. There was no book out there that could give me the information I needed in a way that I could understand and implement effectively. And so there was this novelist, Toni Morrison, and he said, he had this quote that if you find a book you really want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. So that is what I did. But, when we launched it, it actually made international bestseller in children's health, which was my main goal, which I still just can't believe. Thank you. It's my life's work. It's a guide that I needed, but I couldn't find. But I think it's different from other books out there because I'm not only a practitioner, but I'm also a mum who gets it. And so it's really easily digestible. And I really talk about some of the key areas to focus on to help reduce ADHD symptoms naturally, and it feeds really well into my program. So my business is the ADHD Thrive Institute, but my main program is a program for families that basically holds their hands and walks them step by step in everything that they need to do to reduce their child's ADHD symptoms naturally through diet, through detox, through lifestyle, through lab testing. And so part of that program is that lab testing and looking on what's going on in that child's body. The amount of money that I spent over the years, I think over $180,000 to get my son to where he is today. He's now 15. He's in high school. He has not been on medication for years and he's thriving. But most important for me, he's happy and, my family's happy and we've just got this sense of calm, as much calm as you can have when you've got two boys. So let's be real, and I will be realistic. I'm not going to paint like, oh my God, I've got the perfect family. I've got a family with two boys, a 15-year-old and an 11-year-old, but it's normal. You know, it's a normal family, and that's all I wanted. And so now I've been lucky enough to help over 1,300 other families get to the same place as me, but just so much quicker, in so much less time, and so much less cost. So
Yeah,
that's what I do.
I'm sure in there is the lesson: don't do a food sensitivity test and remove everything on day one, lest
That's
you
the
end up
first
in.
lesson.
There's a better way to do it, and I can share that it works, but there is a better way to do it.
There is
This
a
has
better
been
way.
absolutely fascinating. We'll provide some opportunities so people can find you, but I do have some wrap up questions. We are a longevity, health and longevity podcast, so I know this may not be your area of expertise, but Donna, do you have a target age that you want to live to?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I knew that you were going to start talking a little bit about that, so I really sort of just had to stop and think about what I would answer. You know, I don't necessarily have a specific target age in mind, but I think for me, my goal is to live as long as I can while being healthy and being active and being fully present for my family. For me, it's not just about the length of time; it's doing it while I'm happy and healthy, and feeling strong and clear-minded and full of energy and able to do the things that I want to do to enjoy life, to travel, to spend time with my family, but also to continue to help so many others out there, because there's so much chronic illness these days, and declining health. So for me, instead of focusing on a number, and I'm sorry if I'm going against your question, you know, I focus on sort of like those habits that are actually going to support the longevity. You know, everything I talk about: nutrition, stress management, movement. And if that helps me live till my 90s and beyond, that's amazing.
So could we jot down 90?
Oh, but that's kind of putting it out into the world, isn't it?
Well, so if you had to put it out in the world, would you want it to be longer than 90 or shorter than 90? With all the parameters you just described.
I think, you know, mid-90s feels good.
I like it. And then how long do you think humans can live? You didn't think you were going to get away with that, did you?
Yeah, I didn't. But look, I think it's such an interesting question that you've just asked. I actually did a bit of research, and I think that the maximum that the human lifespan that we've been told is around 120 years. But I think with all of the advancements in science, in nutrition, in functional medicine, it can be pushed way beyond that. I think the sky's the limit, you know, but I think for me, it's not that lifespan, it's that health span, you know, the years that we live in that good health. And so if I think about the biggest factor that's impacting longevity, that's inflammation. And so, you know, if we can really optimize our bodies, I think humans can live way beyond 120, you know, absolutely, if we take care of our bodies at a cellular level.
So I think I'll jot down 120 unless you want it to be higher, right? Because maybe there's things we have to address. Or would you like it higher?
Are you going to come back and, you know, tap on my shoulder when I'm 90 and say, do you remember that podcast that we had?
It's time.
It's time.
It's time. Now we know very confidently you can live to 150, but you said this on this one podcast so long ago.
Exactly.
All right. So I jotted down 120. What are 2 to 3 protocols, habits, mindsets, let's call them shortcuts, to longevity and a long health span that you would share?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm just going to say it again. Prioritize reducing inflammation. You know, chronic inflammation, it speeds up aging. It speeds up disease. It breaks down the gut, you know, and so really just prioritizing that, eating whole anti-inflammatory foods, avoiding those processed junk, and balancing blood sugar, you know, is really important to slow that aging. I think that's one. You know, in the longevity space, it's all about supporting sort of the cells, the cellular energy, the mitochondrial health. I don't talk about it a lot, and that's because I'm working with kids, but I can tell you oxidative stress that breaks down the cells really impacts mitochondrial function. We do tackle that in one of the tests that we look at, and that's called an organic acid test. But that's we're not going to go back to that, but I definitely think supporting that cellular energy, that mitochondrial health, because that's going to support our energy levels and our brain function. Things like quality sleep, daily movement, reduction in toxins like the glyphosate that we talked about, the processed foods, and then bringing in some key supplements like B vitamins, CoQ10, magnesium. They're really going to help keep our cells thriving. And then, look, I think that daily detox and mastering our stress, because these are key things that are, if we've got lots of toxins and we're not optimizing our detoxification and we're constantly in this state of stress, it is going to break down our cells. It is going to, increase aging. It's not just physical, it's mental and emotional as well. So, sweating, hydrating, eating liver-supporting foods that really keep the body detoxing naturally, and then practicing those stress-reducing things like mindfulness, deep breathing, strong relationships with your family. Like, all of these things reduce stress and improves longevity. So for me, I think longevity is not about chasing, youth. I think it's about really sort of making these small, consistent choices that are really going to keep us happy, healthy, and live longer.
And thriving.
Yes.
There we go. What are 1 to 2 things you think people get absolutely wrong regarding longevity and a long health span?
Yeah, and look, I talk about this a lot, and I do this in my business as well. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions about longevity is that it's all about genetics. Genetics definitely play a role. You might have heard this saying before, but genetics load the gun. Your lifestyle, your diet, and your environment influence the expression. And so, just because a family member had a disease doesn't mean that you're destined for the same fate. What you eat, how you manage your stress, your sleep quality, exposure to all these toxins, they directly impact aging and disease risk. And so for me, I think that's the biggest misconception.
I like you've clearly been in the States for long enough that you're using gun analogies. So I like that. All right, Donna, how can people contact you?
Yeah, look, I want to put it out there. I mean, Chris, I have to say this has been probably one of the funnest and most enjoyable podcast interviews that I've done. And so I just want to offer your audience, you can email me directly. I don't usually say this, but my email address is Dana, DANA, at ADHDThriveInstitute.com, or you can check out my website, ADHDThriveInstitute.com, or I'm on all the social platforms at ADHD
And social platforms, it's also ADHD Thrive Institute?
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. And what in the near future are you excited about?
So many things, but I'm just, as all of these advances happening, changes in, in lab testing and understanding longevity and all of this stuff, I'm continuing I'm excited about expanding the reach of my message, and help more families realize that you don't have to suffer if you've got a child with ADHD. There is hope that, ADHD can be managed naturally by addressing what's going on in that body. There are so many parents out there that feel hopeless, but I want them to know there is another way and your child can thrive. And I've seen it in my own family, and I've seen it in now over 1,300 other families. And so, there is hope, and you can have success and they can have success.
Well, hopefully, Donna, we have helped your mission to provide hope, practical strategies, and a path to thriving without medication. You can find her, so us Americans would pronounce it Dana, Dana at ADHD Thrive Institute.com. It's pronounced Donna, so just remember that if you actually hop in a conversation. You can find her website, ADHD Thrive Institute.com, and she's on all the socials as the same. Donna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Chris, so much for having me.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Live Beyond the Norms podcast. Make sure to subscribe and follow. Also, make sure not to be that guy, the guy sharing this podcast with people who are not interested in living beyond the norms. If you would like to learn more about the ESS60 molecule, the molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experimental result on mammals in history, a full 90% extension of life, visit myvitalc.com. That's myvitalc as in carbon.com.